Hello, I'm Stephen Robinson. Welcome to the Playtyper Guy podcast. Joining me today is my friend Jessica Ellis, filmmaker and long COVID patient, which is relevant. I normally don't mention someone's health background prior to starting, but um, it's been 5 years since the pandemic, and it's sort of one of those kind of shared incidents in our culture where no one agrees on what had happened. And Jessica has been kind enough to sort of come on and share her experience with me. Thank you, Jessica.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk to you.
So, could you tell us a bit about your experience with COVID, um, what your life was before, and what your life is like now? Um, and I will preface this by, as we had discussed prior to starting recording, um, for a lot of reasonable people just wanted to forget that COVID ever happened. It was sort of like this mass event where we don't want to wear masks anymore. We don't want to like even acknowledge that it ever occurred, specifically in the arts, which I think is something also we have in common. Is like it's a period where we don't even want to dramatize that it happened.
Yeah.
Um, and I'd love to talk about that with you as well. But please tell me about your experience.
I was always very cautious with COVID. I had existing health issues. And so from the beginning of the pandemic, I was on the more cautious side. And then I got COVID 2 months after President Biden said the pandemic was over in 2022, right as this push back towards normality started to really pick up steam. And I never recovered. Before that, I was really active. I had just made my first feature film. Like I was on this real heat wave of energy and ambition. And when I got long COVID, my life just stopped. And I think that you'll find that the ability to ignore the pandemic, the ongoing pandemic, stops the minute you get long COVID, which, as we know from all the studies, is something that a lot of people are hurtling towards at this moment. So, since then, my life has become much more sedentary. I can't take more than about a 10-15 minute walk on a good day. There are days I can't get out of bed at all. Luckily, my work is primarily writing, so I can still work, but my ability to socialize is obviously greatly reduced by the fact that I still take precautions and still need to stay healthy. And very few people are willing to accommodate that. And also, it becomes an awkward social situation. And yeah, and my social media personality kind of shifted as well, which was a big part of how I got my film made and everything, because I went from being rather quite silly on platforms like Twitter to talking about my experience and talking about what I was seeing with the pandemic a lot more, which lost me a lot of people. So it's been a pretty big sea change this last 5 years for me.
I had interviewed someone who had the position of, we shouldn't have done the lockdowns, or if we had, we should have prioritized people with pre-existing conditions or whatever. And I'm sure you've heard this as well. So anyone who was vulnerable, obviously it's just social distance, everyone else go about their lives. There's obvious reasons why that would have been difficult to maintain. I'm not going to litigate that so much. But what's interesting was the argument that, and this is a young man, healthy, that there was no need to take the vaccine. And I've seen this a lot. And unfortunately, this is stuff that our current um, RFK, head of health and services, believes, the idea of that it is better to get the disease and have your body adjust to it. And I have heard quote unquote normal people say this. I have no idea personally why anyone would believe it's like an old Simpsons joke about, oh, I thought I just got over the plague. Like Bart's in the Middle Ages and he gets bit by a rat. It's like, I just got over the plague. Like, no, there are certain things your bot, like the idea that if I let a heavyweight boxer beat me up and I just recover from it, I'll be no, I've done serious damage to my kidneys. I don't think this is a good thing. I, I mean, other than like, trite eugenics dismissals of that, Why do you think people believe that? And had you encountered this prior to that, that somehow getting an illness and recovering from it is better? Had you ever encountered that before COVID?
Not really. I mean, there were always, that's an old theory. There was the idea of like get all your kids infected with measles at once and stuff like that. And like that was like a very 19th century way of thinking about it. But we didn't really understand viruses then, and we do much better now. And we know that a lot of viruses have the potential to significantly damage your ability to fight viruses in the future. And COVID, that was part of what has bothered me about the response to COVID by these quote unquote normal people is it's not a scientific, it was made when we didn't have scientific data about what the disease could do. And the arrival of that data in the form of thousands of studies now that have been done on COVID has not changed anybody's mind. So it was an opinion formed in ignorance and now defended against scientific fact. Getting COVID does not make it easier to deal with COVID, and it does give you a much higher chance of developing long-term conditions like long COVID and doing things like permanent damage to your vascular system. Like, we know this has been known for years. So I'm always interested in the psychological underpinnings of people that have dealt with this trauma. And I think not just the trauma of the illness, but the trauma of governments failing to respond to the illness effectively by just pretending to be stronger than it. That's kind of my take. This is a trauma response. It's an avoidance.
It talked about with the President Biden, what he had said. I've written about this as well. If you trace back sort of the collapse of Biden's presidency, a few things of his terrible year of 2021, both inflation, but also don't worry about masks. Don't worry. Everything will be back to normal if you all get vaccinated. And with respect, I get the virus changed, right? We had the Delta variant and it was clear. But once he sort of said, okay, well, that's not entirely true, or there will be breakthrough cases, or you might need to protect yourself, then suddenly everyone was like, we can't trust anything, even though there seemed to be a viable explanation for what had occurred.
It was very, very, very stupid of that administration to set up the vaccine as a panacea. It was not, there's no vaccine, I guess, except smallpox that is 100% effective and carries absolutely no risk of side effects or anything. That doesn't exist. And, it's a more part of the problem with our media landscape right now is that subtlety is very easy to lose. And the moment you see he said something definite, like, this is after the vaccine, everything will go back to normal. It'll be fine. We won't have to worry about COVID anymore. And that was immediately disproven. Like, as people kept getting sick, like, why wouldn't people immediately begin to say, well, we can't trust anybody? I mean, if you were looking at this from 10,000 feet, but behind the specific issue of COVID is this much bigger issue of this collapse in faith in our institutions, a collapse that seems very warranted when you look at COVID as an example, because just about everything, other than the fact that a vaccine was developed pretty quickly, everything about the messaging, the implementation, the way government policy worked around it. I mean, it collapsed in every level, and not just in America. It was a problem around the world in most countries, everywhere. And there was this strange push towards the idea that, like, well, we just have to accept a worse life then. We shouldn't do anything to prevent anything. We shouldn't try to make what we can make better. If people die, they die. If people get sick, they get sick. We don't have to care about that anymore. And that view seems to be spreading in an alarming way, in my opinion, across issues.
Let me ask you this, because it's kind of like when I think about 2020, it's sort of this merge of medical experts, how doctors relate to patients and how they talk about situations versus being a politician and leading people, and what do I need to say to get the most alignment or whatever. And in certain ways, there are very different skill sets or different priorities. And it felt like there was a constant, I mean, Trump was not a good faith actor, but even with the Biden administration, there was sort of like, okay, well, what do we say to people right now? or what, and things started to fall apart when I think there was something CDC was like, okay, well, actually the best masks are not sort of the bandit scarf that you made. It's really this, but that's expensive. So we're just going to say just wear any mask. But then it just felt like they were sort of hedging their bets as opposed
Yeah.
to just saying, look, I'm sorry, this will actually work. Just, putting your high school scarf or on your shirt is not going to be as effective. And so it felt like often I would see people who just really weren't trained for dealing with the public in that way. And it was being clearly exploited by bad actors who were leveraging on every type of thing they were saying. And what's some of your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was an easy, obvious choice that they could have made to just stick with what the science was telling us. The science was telling us very early on that COVID is airborne. They didn't want to tell the public that because they were afraid it would freak them out. Every time either administration that was in charge tried to step in the way of science with politically oriented messaging, it opened up their strategy to attack because it could be demonstrably shown as not being true, and if either administration had just been like, well, this is what the science is saying, and so that's what we're going to follow, it's not that everybody would have immediately been like, oh, all right, then I'll wear a mask. But the charge of being disingenuous or confused or lying about the situation wouldn't have been able to been lobbied, and it wouldn't have been able to be successfully lobbied at conspiracy theorists who were already on a high and now had been locked in their houses for 6 months and were excited to have something new to come up with reasons that they were being tricked about, and so it was, I really think it was a disastrous failure of government to decide they needed to game the message instead of simply sticking with what was science telling us. This was an airborne disease. N95s were effective. We don't have enough of them at the beginning of the pandemic, but we're ramping up production. The vaccine is going to protect you from serious illness, but it doesn't totally protect against transmission, and it can't guarantee you that you won't get long COVID, but it's still going to most likely stop you from dying, and that's our first priority. Like, those messages are not too super hard to put out there, but for some reason everybody was unwilling to be honest. And now we're at this situation where an administration that is dedicated to lying, I think, as their primary mode of communication has taken over. So the consequences have come swiftly, unfortunately, for all of us in this country.
Even before, because RFK, and I'd like to talk to you about that if I may, because the fact that he is in charge, like the worst thing of Trump's presidency was how he handled the pandemic. He should never have been, if he had done nothing else, just 2020 alone should have been, there's no way this guy ever gets back to the White House, right? He could have governed completely normally, but if he had just done that, he should have never been allowed back in the White House. And then he gets back and puts in, it would be like George W. Bush being reelected and saying, okay, well, I might have had an oopsie on 9/11, but bin Laden is now my head of terrorism. What? Like, well, that's even worse. I don't think you should trust that guy. But we have to own up to the idea that RFK was running for president as a Democrat. And we can talk about whether Biden should have engaged fully in the primary process. But I felt like RFK was ignored to the extent of not just, it was more like, here's some guys running against me, but not the idea of like, no, this guy running for president who has a very popular family name, he has a not inconsiderable degree of support. If he becomes, this is insane. And we should have learned from Trump that you should start as soon as possible saying, this would be very bad if he becomes president. Were you seeing any of that during RFK's run for the presidency? Where there was a real engagement in the threat he posed?
Not really, but there were symptoms that this was going to be a problem coming from the Democrats. Not just coming from the right. I was in LA for most of the last 20 years, and you started to see about 10 years ago these pockets of very wealthy liberal often women, buying into this kind of Gwyneth Paltrow-y pseudo science stuff, largely in the name of preventing their children from having autism, which they're just wildly ableist, but that's a whole other issue. But this weird wellness industry stuff that RFK kind of seized on when he was a Democrat uh, was building over about the last 15 or 20 years, I think. Like there was a roll up to that where it was seen as, Gwyneth Paltrow has always been seen as like kooky but harmless, but it's like we were spiraling towards this because there were already starting to be issues in private schools in LA of like kids not getting vaccinated for measles and stuff like that. And it's interesting that has in turn merged with a right-wing movement that's anti-vax and anti-science. But RFK, I mean, I think to most people, he's married to Cheryl Hines. He was big in kind of the entertainment world. Like they were just kind of in that wealthy California-y liberal circle of wealthy people. And I think he was generally seen as kooky and harmless for a long time. I don't think anybody really started recognizing him as a threat until he kind of leaned into the MAGA group, and started his rhetoric started becoming much more extreme on vaccines, or at least openly extreme on vaccines and all of his great ideas about children in airports having mitochondrial damage. And
it just seemed that Democrats were sounding more alarmed about the possibility of, city-run groceries and food deserts in New York than they were
aren't they scared of that?
Than someone running for office who represents a true movement of know nothing, as you said, and I think we both have been following that. The Phoebe, the Gwyneth Paltrow, the whole sort of that had been amongst the left, but that had been sort of radicalized in COVID. Like 2020 was a radicalizing event for a lot of groups.
Yeah.
Often the same. And also demos that were given a bit of deference within the Democratic Party, suburban women, mother.
Yeah,
I'll let you.
You know what we've done.
Because Trump does so much terrible stuff, right? Like that he's invading LA and whatever. But RFK is an ongoing scandal. You'll read something about that he's doing with vaccines or what he's saying about this, and it's like a Far Side cartoon about being in hell and everything's already bad, and it's just like the coffee's cold. They thought of everything. So it's just like I'm like, oh what? Oh right, RFK. Oh my God, it's not bad enough. It's like such a Legion of Doom cabinet. It's like, oh my God, this guy, and people are going to die. Like millions of people are going to die. And I don't think that's being.
But we have spent the last 5 years inoculating ourselves to that idea. And I think that is a failure of the Democratic Party, which I'm also accused of bashing a lot, even though, I'm happy to be a part of as a progressive. But like, we have been telling ourselves relentlessly since about 2022 that anybody who dies of COVID, anybody who gets permanently sick from COVID, they deserve it. It's not our problem. We don't need to care about those people. You do you. I mean, literally up until yesterday on social media, I had somebody telling me once again, it's not my responsibility to care about anybody else. And like, that is a belief that chews at the foundations of society, of what society exists to do, this idea that we're supposed to be safer in a group. And so, yeah, millions of people are going to die, and we've been teaching ourselves not to care that much about it. And I wonder if that's part of the reason we are still seeing such a muted response on the left of protest against this administration, against what they're doing every single day. Like it's not non-existent, and part of it is how the media is choosing to cover it. But like, there's not people chaining themselves to the White House every day. Like there's not people, it seems strangely quiet and just there's an acceptance of like it's bad and it's going to keep getting worse. And I don't know quite what to do about that.
Yeah, I don't. And from my coverage of it, people just wanted to forget the pandemic. Who's going to go back? There was no there is clearly no public will for maintained shutdowns or maintain in people. And I get the arguments about suicide rates, leveling depression. I get all of that. Do you see any option where, you know, we could have protected more lives while reopening, like, you know, because I'm not an expert in this, but like what could have been done with where the public will was, say, in 2021? Was there a choice that was made that, or something could have happened that could have acknowledged the public will but been better for public health?
I mean, I think there are two things that, and I hope these are not so pie in the sky that they sound insane. I think there were two things that could have been done. One, I think that the administration could have led by example. They could have kept masking. They could have, been open about the COVID policies that they were maintaining in the White House while encouraging everybody else to drop them, which we know they did. Like they could have, you can't force people to change their minds, but you can set the tone for how you're going to respond and hope that that filters down. And Biden gave the impression that he wanted this to be over as much as anybody, and he found it as annoying as much as anybody. So I think that helped reinforce that public will. And then the second thing I think they could have done from a practical standpoint is focus on improving indoor air quality standards. We had the huge infrastructure bill go through. Part of that could have been dedicated to upgrading HVAC facilities in public schools. There could have been more guidance put out on updating, OSHA. I'm not a government person, so I don't know exactly the mechanism for how this would have been done. But if we had focused on the idea that we need to adapt instead of forget, then I think we would be in a better place, and we absolutely would have saved lives if there had been any forward motion on better indoor air quality or masking, or just continuing to give a shit about your neighbors. We lost 44,000 people to COVID last year. Like, people are still dying of this in vast numbers, and I don't think people are heartless. I think people have trained themselves to ignore it.
And I'll ask you about, in your professional sense as an artist, about no one wanted to talk about masks or so forth, but just from the political standpoint, what do you think of this, just the sense of people not wanting to have any memory of 2020, and how do you get past that?
There's good reasons I'm not a politician, because I operate on the principle that, you should generally do the right thing, and that eventually is it's a slow process, but it's eventually going to pay out, because the truth can't be disappeared. Lies will eventually fade away. But, I go back to, and this is not a political issue, although it crossed into it. An example I bring up a lot is Claire Patterson, who was a scientist in the mid-20th century who discovered that lead in our food seals and our gasoline was literally damaging everyone's brains. And there was a multi-conglomerate effort to shut him down, completely take his funding away, ruin his life. And today we don't have lead in our gasoline and our food things, because he was right. And eventually the truth became unavoidable. I mean, I wish any politician was so punk rock right now to be wearing a mask, because it is still the right thing to be doing from a stance of protecting your community, if that's important to you. But, I think when someone's trauma is based in avoidance, the only cure for that is exposure, right? I mean, like, that's kind of our theory on how to deal with everything. And all of this is grounded in avoidance. We don't want to think about the pandemic. We don't want to hear about the pandemic. We don't want to be reminded that there are millions of people who are disabled, and more happening every week, and eventually the only way to ever deal with that is to face it. And my thing has always been, I'd like to face that before everybody's sick forever. And since all science points to your risk of long COVID going up with every infection, that day could be coming sooner than we think. So I don't know. I think politically, you should stand behind what you believe in. If you're actually selling a message of improving your community and caring about everybody and protecting your community, I think you kind of just have to ignore the haters on this one, and be clear about your reasons why. And that's going to lose you support from some people, but maybe long run, it's seen as it was always the right thing to do.
Artistically, definitely, no one wants to address that COVID exist existed. Forget might still be an issue, right? So the sequel to Sex and the City, and Just Like That, had recently come out. Sex and the City aired actually during 9/11, and their only real acknowledgement of it was that firefighters were hot, which is fine. It's escapist television, but was interesting because they write out the character Mr. Big. He dies of a heart attack, but he was someone with an established. He had a heart condition. He had someone who a lot of people died in New York, and that was not something. And I had raised that just that what might have been interesting. Or Samantha's not on the show. She had a pre-existing condition. She had breast cancer. She was someone who, or might have had to leave New York because of these are stories that had happened, and everyone's response was like, I don't want to even think about it. I don't want to see it. And I guess what you're saying about avoidance, but I get the idea of escapist television, but at the same time, these things exist, right?
Yeah, I mean it's difficult because and I feel empathy for my other artists trying to grapple with this because like I think a lot of us don't know what to say about it. I think even aside from whether they admit COVID is still a problem or not in the present day, like I think a lot of people just literally can't process what happened and don't really have a cohesive idea of what to say on it. However, I will say that shockingly, the very best portrayal of COVID that I have seen in media, and I can't believe I'm saying this, is on Dr. Odyssey. The Pacey from Dawson's Creek is a doctor on a boat thing because his whole backstory is that he was in a coma with COVID. He nearly died. And as such, he remains very sensitive to it. There's an episode where a passenger gets COVID and he immediately requires everybody to mask up. At the beginning of the episode, he is berating his other co-workers into getting a booster because they don't want to and they say COVID's over. And he's like, no. And like, I was shocked. I felt like we had gotten a mole into the Dr. Odyssey room because it was like, there was somebody integrating the pandemic perfectly into a character's backstory and bringing it into the show in a way that felt very natural. And I don't remember seeing anybody upset about that portrayal. So I do think that the door is open to talking about it. I think on the film side, nobody's going to greenlight a movie about COVID because you're not so much. You have very little control over what you get to make a movie about. Execs decide what you get to make movies about, and they're not going to put out a COVID movie. But you have lots of people trying to deal with it through the metaphors of like zombies and like other plagues. There's a few of those movies that have come out, but yeah, I still think because it is still an ongoing situation too. I think people mostly don't know what to say. Then again, Casablanca was made in 1941 in the midst of the war, so like sometimes beautiful art can come out of the middle of a situation. But yeah, it sucks that it is such a frowned upon topic that artists are scared of it. That should never happen, and that should be a sign to artists to open that door because we're supposed to do that. We're supposed to look at the things you're not supposed to talk about.
Oh yeah, or things that are in character. I see Charlotte as someone who would mask or would be concerned about her kid, like
Yeah,
things that would.
it's right. It has lots of hypochondriacs, lots of people on Grey's Anatomy and stuff that you would think would care. But then again, that is also reflective of the world because I have had to watch a lot of people that I find very intelligent and thoughtful and kind make an active decision to stop caring about COVID. And that's been a very jarring experience.
Are you going to be like, as far as I presume you get the boosters every year, and you would qualify, I presume, even under the crazy because you have a pre-existing.
Yeah, I would qualify. I mean, the list is pretty broad. It does include stuff like physical inactivity, and it does include any kind of a mental health diagnosis if you have anxiety. It's a broad list. So I think a lot more people are qualifying than they'll worry about. But yeah, I would qualify regardless. But yeah, it's interesting to watch people who do not have health conditions suddenly feel ignored by the government on COVID because that's quite a reversal to what the last few years have been.
Well, the other thing I noticed, no one wants to wear. The, I thought, okay, well, surely we would agree that we'd wear masks on public transportation,
Yeah,
and we would agree that we would do it like we go to a crowded event because no one wants to get sick. I mean, and Americans were kind of behind the curve on that because I think other countries were sort of like in flu season, wear a mask, and maybe you won't get vaxxed, and maybe you will avoid. You don't necessarily have to get a really bad illness, and so. But a lot again, there's a sort of a rejection of that, as well as sort of the idea that not going to work when you're sick. Um, that was some of that at the time, and then suddenly that's been pulled back. We're kind of going back to our former expectation of we need everyone at work regardless of their physical condition.
I mean, I'd say even worse. It seems to me that corporations have used this as an opportunity to crack down even more on sick leave. And, schools, there are districts of schools now where, regardless of a doctor's note, you're only allowed to have a certain amount of absences and they will
Yeah.
refer you to juvenile court. Otherwise, anytime you see an issue where authoritative bodies are using it to restrict people's safety and freedom, you have to start questioning your side on that issue, because if they're so excited to get to use this is another reason to mess with people and to control people a little bit more. That is an interesting quality. But yeah, the thing with why aren't we all masking on planes and in crowded events, I really start to wonder how much of it is actually because you hardline believe COVID is not a risk, and how much of it is because you will be stigmatized for wearing a mask. So now people are afraid of two things. They don't want to be singled out as different or as paranoid, crazy, the way COVID cautious people are, and they don't want to admit to themselves, they don't want to crack their delusion that this is still a risk to them. So it's harder, it's double reinforced now. And
well, if it's a political statement, and I am a political person, obviously, I do this for a living, so I say this with that in mind. Quote unquote normal people don't particularly like declaring themselves something, right? So I don't really want to go out and someone wearing a MAGA hat those are the kind of people who I want the world to know where I stand. And there are the people who feel proud, but then there are a lot of people who are kind of I don't really want. So yeah, as you're saying, when you put that as where just putting, but of all people, David Fromm said well, can't you get an umbrella, that is not a political statement. It's raining out. I think it's going to rain, I'm going to carry an umbrella. It's not a political statement, but we've made masks this political statement, right? The statement of who I am and so forth. To the point where if I go to a restaurant, if you drop me in a restaurant and my server is wearing a mask, I know what city I'm in, right? And in what state. And it's clearly a statement. And yeah, that's tough. And I think COVID perhaps happened at a time we were already, after 4 years of Trump, kind of shifting further and further away. I think everything becomes, there is no alignment, right? So everything has to be, I'm on this side or I'm on that side. And that becomes very hard in public health.
Yeah, that's the baffling thing about COVID, though, is right, because who was more anti-mask and anti doing anything about it than Trump? And then the Biden administration took over and gradually adopted this nearly the same approach. No, he was not telling people to inject bleach or not get vaccinated, but in terms of other precautions or in terms of continuing to treat it like an ongoing issue, most Democrats think like Republicans do about COVID now. That's kind of undeniable. I've certainly gotten screamed at for wearing a mask in my extremely liberal town, one of the most liberal towns in California, which is saying something. And it is a weird issue that because everybody wanted it to be over on both sides. This is one thing that most mainstream Democrats and Republicans agree on, is that we should keep ignoring COVID.
Well,
except for the vaccines.
Yeah. Well, something Trump said that I think wasn't, Democrats did somewhat challenge at the time, but wasn't fully challenged, was I'm a wartime president. That's what he announced, right? And usually when someone, I think Biden came in on wanting to, I want to end this war.
Yeah.
And perhaps he does not have the best track record at ending wars.
No, not so much.
But so 2020, so and again, maybe kind of rushing to exit, not perhaps executing it very well, but the idea of like, I think with that in mind, I think a lot of Democrats would tell you or react to you of like, you expected us to maintain a condition of wartime conditions indefinitely. The public wouldn't stand for that. You're out of your mind. And obviously, I don't know what the answer is to that or that position, but I think that was pretty clearly the Democratic position pretty early on as well. Like, this was not an issue we're going to fight. And now the issue is just sort of getting someone sane in the public health, I guess, and sort of trying to undo the damage that RFK has done. But how bad do you think do you think that he is potentially an anomaly, or do you think this is now a standard of what? Because we can get a sane person in if a Democrat wins, perhaps, but if like every 4 years or every so often, every time a Republican wins, you're going to get an anti-science kook in, like, what is the long-term damage of that, do you think?
I mean, the long-term damage is tremendous. Like, I think one of the things I would say about the Biden administration overall was that it felt like a pause button was hit. Like, we didn't get any crazier, but we didn't fix any of the structural underpinnings that allowed Trump 1 to occur. And I'm not saying that's all Joe Biden's fault. That's not all his fault, but regardless, his administration was not able to address those problems. And then we put Trump back in office. And, if Democrats keep going into things planning to hit the problem with returning to normal is that normal is the thing that allows people like Trump to take power. We need to fight for better than normal. We need to have people in office that recognize that there is a problem and want to fix that problem and make it better. Like, there was this idea that we could just reset to 2008 when we had elected Obama with Joe Biden as his VP, and racism was solved and the country was fine now. And now that he's back in office, we'd go back, we'd wake up and we'd go back to that. And obviously that's not true. Like, that is a fantasy. And so until we get somebody in office who's willing to build up the structural requirements of what it takes to be a political appointee and reinstate science as a priority in this country, I think we're just going to have this gradual jerky halt backwards. We'll have a terrible Republican president, and then we'll elect a moderate who doesn't want to change anything that's a Democrat, and things will stop for 4 years, and then we'll elect another crazy Republican, and we'll go back farther. It's a slow degrade backwards, or possibly a very fast degrade backwards, depending on what the next pandemic is. But yeah, you have to get, I think the reason candidates like Mamdani are making such a huge splash nationally, even though he's running in a local election, is that they have plans to improve the status quo, not just maintain it. And that is appealing to a lot of people.
Before we go, where can folks find you and on the internets, or anything else you'd like to tell people about?
You can find me. I'm just on Blue Sky these days at bowdismamajama.bluesky.social. And if you like someone who screams about COVID a lot and movies a little bit, that's kind of my personality now. I wish it wasn't, but it is. But yeah, so you could find me there.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much. Everyone, like, share, subscribe, go follow Jessica, and we will catch you next time. Take care.